Become a member and support the channel. Old World Tactics, Battle Reports, the 2+ podcast.
All right, hello 2+ fans. We're here with a special episode tonight in Australia, but morning in Canada. Unless you've been living under a rock and playing the old world, you would know we've got a very special guest, VAL HEFFELFINGER. Welcome, VAL, to the 2+ podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a lovely invite. Happy to be here.
Thanks, and Paddy, thanks for being up as well. We know it's a battle with young children, just shared by many people on this podcast and in the audience. But we're really happy just to jump straight into it, Val. You're giving up a lot of time for us. We really appreciate it. And I thought no one's better qualified, I think, in the video sphere of the old world to sort of describe, do you think that Warhammer is bigger than Games Workshop itself? Big question to throw at you to begin with this early in the morning.
Whoa. I guess don't worry, audience. We had like a pre-chat before the show. Okay? So like he's not just diving in that hard. So thank you. By the way, I've enjoyed watching videos over I guess almost the year and a bit.
Yeah. Thank you.
And happy to appear down under, despite the time difference. Is Warhammer bigger than Games Workshop? I guess. I think kind of obviously, but I think that's kind of your standard artist's thing. Where like I studied theater back in my uni day, as your people might say, and I discovered this concept of when you create art and you put it out in the world. You are no longer in control of how it's interpreted. You might have the best of intentions around, what you wrote, and you might know exactly what it was. I remember back, doing English class. I don't know if you guys remember this, but when I was doing English in sort of like the early 2000s, and at the sort of the high school level, there was a lot of obsession over like what the author's like symbols and imagery were, and all this kind of like, oh, they definitely intended this to be that. And maybe like an author might have had like all this subtext written into it, and it's all very intentional, or it's just what poured out of them, and like that was what was on the page. But the audience gets to decide what they think it means, and I think the same is true with any creative endeavor, and Warhammer is one of those things. And I would say Games Workshop, we know in their history, would much prefer that we just figured this stuff out ourselves and sort of take it over the sort of prescribed ways, I think really driven by customers, honestly, where, people want an official answer and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, I think, the community, the way people take things and change rules or convert models or just how it's inspired other games. Yeah, Warhammer has, very much, I think, become something bigger than just the game released by a company, and that the community around it specifically, to me, feels, bigger than is Warhammer bigger than Games Workshop, or I think also it can be read as like does it matter more than a company that's listed on a stock exchange. Not to get all like, what's the word? I don't even have the right word, but it is a very meaningful thing to a lot of people. Probably why there were a lot of broken hearts after the end times too.
Speaking of the end times, do you think it's the old world specifically, because that's what we're playing now? Do you think that the community, the culture around this game, is different to what it was? Because I wasn't around for 6th, 7th, 8th.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? So obviously we've got a new game essentially brought back to us. Do you think it's the same community though, how it was being treated, how it was being interpreted? Because things like the internet have progressed so much now that, and this is getting big. We've started very big here, haven't we?
Right. This is where I want to be.
Yeah. But we've got like Cathay comes out and within a week, everyone's figured out the best list anyway. And then it's just whether or not people play it. Where back in the day, I presume I wasn't there. You had some creative list writers that figured out the game, and then someone brought something to the next tournament that figured it out. But do you think it's now different in this modern age?
Yeah, and I think that's actually been a challenge for something like Games Workshop. So, like, a lot of people talk about how, Games Workshop does not make competitive games. They don't make, they're aimed more at your beer and pretzels narrative gamer or what have you. And I've got nothing wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong with somebody who can play a game that to me is the equivalent of like a night college course. Requires specialized tools and skills to develop to just put things down like on a table that you might have had to build yourself. Like 6x4 tables are not what kitchen tables are. so like there's not one single element about this that is simple. And I guess why am I rambling about that? I've lost my train of thought already. Give me my prompts. Give me my prompt again. Throw it back to me.
You've lost us all, and I lost us all as well. But I can empathize with that though, because the amount of bloody effort that goes into this game, people expect a certain return, I suppose, from the company, because we all love this game.
Yes, but it was a question about the community being different and like the internet changing all of that. I went off on the tangent about casual things. So the reason why I went on that tangent was, and here we go, we can start again. Just that I don't think Games Workshop intentionally makes a game that can only be played casually, that is inherently imbalanced or imprecise. I think they are a content like factory, and they push a lot of things out. And I think they're really dominated by crunch and deadlines, and so quality suffers, I think, a lot of the times with the stuff they put out. And I think they got used to being able. This is a sort of an interesting thing, but I think they got used to being able to change the game or balance the game by disrupting it all the time. So the reason they don't usually release all the rules at once, sort of drip fed all these books, is that if you drop like a really like a new army book or a new codex into a meta or a group of people playing a game, and this thing has just all kinds of new things that it can do and challenges and questions that it asks of its opponents, then those opponents have to change how they play the game. That's your meta game, right? That's how it works. So they use that as sort of like a rebalancing technique. I really do believe this for years. So it's like chaos rebalancing, and whether or not that was an intentionally driven thought, I don't know, but it was certainly that was the effect. The game would be constantly sort of refreshing, rebalancing to different things being strong relative to one another, because new things would be introduced or new rules would be changed as an edition went on. But then what you described like 15 minutes ago, which is that we got good at Warhammer out here. And in fact, if you're over in 40K land, there are people who are paid to well, they're not paid. They created a job for themselves, like your local tennis pro or your local golf pro, to teach people the game of Warhammer 40K so that they can, because again, it's not easy. Even the for dummies 40K or, AOS for babies who, can barely, name all the colors, that is just, you put that in front of a normal person, it is the most complicated, absurd thing they've ever seen in their life, right? So like, this is and it's so popular, it's actually caused people to offer a service of, I'll teach you how to play this as best you can. And people have accepted that as like a thing that is viable. And so now when a book is released, or even before it's released, you have people who basically whose job it is to understand rules. And they understand, like you said, probably within a reasonable margin of error. I don't know if Old World's this good yet, but we'll get there real fast. Within a reasonable margin of error, this is what will probably be the best thing for winning the game before it even hits the street. And that is something that's your, I guess, once upon a time it was called net listing or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's something that I think they that kind of throws a wrench in this idea of being able to refresh things when your new riddle is solved before like your hands even open. It's like kind of changes how they do things. And that's why I think in Warhammer 40K and AOS, they actually hired someone whose job it is to manage the game after the rules release, right? So like that's why they do make the adjustments. I don't disagree. It's probably too much.
Yeah.
I.e. I think they're about quarterly or something like that, and like and maybe semi-annually, like so every 6 months for like points and those kinds of things. And once a year they change the mission set. So like that's a lot. You got to be pretty like super deep into it, engaged to like really enjoy every single thing that they're doing and reacting to. But having that person whose job it is to like know how the game works and know how people are actually playing with it, and then adjust those things as needed, is desperately needed in something like Old World as well. Just maybe not at such a breakneck pace.
We might pick up on that in a second with Renegade. Do you mind, Paddy, if we shout out those who support the channel? Because we've seen a big uptick, as you just said, Val. Pretty much we've made this channel from teaching people how to play. We started just recording ourselves.
Yeah.
But then the demand was, oh, okay, can you show me how judging skirmishes might work in a game you've played? Paddy and I are lucky to play a lot more than most people on the internet. So yeah, in recent times with 1.5, it's picked up a bit, and we've picked up a major sponsor. So thanks to Jeff again at Pandemwargaming. We've put the link below. We get a bit of a kickback from that link, so please check him out. But also he's someone we know who's printing. He prints terrain. He's printed the bases for my Vampire Counts army, which we might get into if we want to attract the negative corners of the internet to us. But on top of that, we also have picked up a couple more sponsors. So thanks to everybody who's joined at Patreon. We will be shouting out people in all of those videos. But recently, it's been great to see people help us out because there has been a lot of demand for content with 1.5, and we want to get into that over the next few weeks. So, Val, do you mind talking about, as you say...
One second. I just have to say that, like, Pandemwargaming should probably not have a panda on his logo because everyone will go to Pandemwargaming.
That's true.
And
is that right?
And be like, what the hell is this?
Are they violent creatures? Are they warlike?
Well, I just mean like it's Pandem, but he's got a panda.
It's confusing.
It's just too much for my Canadian brain.
We know Jeff personally. We'll pass it on. When you said...
Yes, go ahead.
No, sorry.
And thank you to all the supporters of this channel and anyone who does this stuff and you enjoy it. Because it does take a lot of effort, guys.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So it does. When you talked about Old World needing something like this, so I've been a fledgling tournament organizer and was running a store back in the day. It's like sort of selling Warhammer, so the other side of the fence. Yeah, a long time ago. So to me, it's interesting when we talk about the eras that we're in 2025 and people talk about 8th and End Times 2015, but I was sort of building armies in 2005 and 1997. And I'm like, yeah, very different eras.
Yeah.
But yeah, Old World is somewhat those people coming back, and the game is not as laser focused as maybe some of the other games out there. Do you think when you felt like, and where people have watched Square Based, they would have heard you talk about this a bit, but with Renegade, it didn't feel like it was so much a comp pack. It's almost like a culture pack, like trying to bring people back in who have these armies that, like I painted a Lizardmen army, 4,000 points, and it's probably my best painted army, and it just sits here now, really. I don't feel like I can play in tournaments. Well, I get it out, but it was definitely not something that I would have taken to events for a large chunk of the last year. I would have felt like I would have had my bottom handed to me.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the main impetus of Renegades. So Renegades, for anyone who doesn't know, I with a lot of community input and involvement, said I just can't take this anymore, and we put out some, I guess, adjustments or edits to the PDFs for legacy factions. So the factions that didn't make the cut for the Core 9, I guess Core 10 now, it was wildly well received, and that was incredibly surprising. And sorry, were you asking like is it like were you asking was it more of a balance or like where the motivation for it came from?
Well, I felt like it wasn't a balance so much in what I liked about it because there's a tournament we'll shout out the Old Hammer series in Sydney, and
Okay.
they've quickly built up. Probably is bi-monthly every 2 months. Bi-monthly, probably get a bi-monthly tournament that gets 40 players. The most recent one just sold out on the first
Wow.
day within 12 hours. Yeah, so they adopted Renegade straight away. Straight away.
Really? Okay.
Yep. So that's I think last time. It was in play and in New South Wales in Australia. I guess it's been pretty much received really well. But it felt like it was to bring models back and put them in an old world context rather than say, right, we're going to fix this tiny thing and give you, as you say, another college course 201 of how to play Warhammer again. So it's mostly that, you've got a demon army, lizardmen army. How do you get those models out rather than let's make every army 50,
Or
50-50 matchup.
or like Patty, you're a Total War fan, and
Okay.
you're like you loved Skaven, and you're like,
It's,
and the last time you were like, I wonder what Games Workshop is. I hear there's a game for this. The last time you clicked on that link, it led to Age of Sigmar, which is a great game for a lot of people, but it's not Total War. It's not that world, and it's sort of like that, but like where are all the guys? So like, yeah, the having old world with missing and also some iconic, some might say most Warhammer fantasy, like Lizardmen and Scaven specifically, are like some of the it feels like more unique IP that GW has.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys remember or if you guys have either of you gone down a 40K dalliance or have you always been down the Warhammer fantasy stream there? Okay, so I am really like my Warhammer life when I came back to Warhammer, I was pulled into 40K in about late 2015. I didn't actually start talk to my wife being like, hey, I know you don't know this about me, but I like science fiction miniatures, and I was just gonna get a couple to paint. Don't worry, I'm not gonna be like a convention guy or something. I'm just gonna do that. So that's the era. And when I came back, I actually didn't even know that fantasy had ended because I was just really into 40K. And so in those days, basically Games Workshop had stopped talking to its customers, and had stopped releasing rules updates. They had ended fantasy without a press release. It was just here's the new game. So it was a weird time, and this is where, getting back to the first question, which is Warhammer is sort of Warhammer bigger than Games Workshop. I think this is where that comes from, is because the people who loved the game were really left to fend for themselves. And in Warhammer 40K and Age of Sigmar literally didn't have points. Community had to figure that out. By the second edition, Games Workshop adopts, maybe JTY, if you're watching, you can't escape me, pal. All right? Can't escape me. I'm on all channels. I'm hailing on all channels. Maybe just pick up the Renegade pack, slide her into 2.0. But anyway, so Age of Sigmar, I think, is genuinely Games Workshop is try this. And the community is fine. And they found a way to make it work. They added points to it, and they added a cool mission pack to it. There's a lot of people who really took that from a conceptual game-ish thing and made it into something they could enjoy. And meanwhile, in 40K, which was still the biggest game, 40K was on the ropes. This is 7th edition Warhammer 40,000, but people still wanted to play it. And you see this in Old World too, where there was actually, when I came into it, I found it really fascinating that Warhammer had this inversion of the jocks versus the nerds. So the people who really loved tournaments and going to play events and trying to actually win the game were bullied all the damn time on the internet by people who thought that was uncouth. That's not what this is about. That's ungentlemanly and all this stuff. And so like, but a lot of that was also driven by the fact that the game itself was just mechanically didn't function out of the box. So like the community had to create answers to unanswerable, riddles in the rules, interactions, and things like that. Also format, army composition, a lot of those things. Like if you just played it out of the box, would result in a tournament scenario, playing with strangers scenario, with just horrible mismatches of expectations. So you had to, at a base level, the community had to answer questions and say, here's the format. And the reason I'm talking about this is there were basically two spheres of this. There was the ITC, which was American, two guys named Reese and Frankie in California. They were game store owners, and they loved tournaments. They were inspired by things like Adepticon in the United States to run their own events, and they now are the guys who run the biggest wargaming event certainly I guess kind of English-speaking world, because there are big ones out there too. But over 1,000 40K players, for example, will show up at the Las Vegas Open, and that's what they wound up creating and growing. But they believed in this big tent philosophy, right? So they believed that their goal was to get more people to like run events, and they wanted more people to go to events, and their view was that meant that there would be more people who traveled to events, and therefore more people would come to their events. So their goal, and they had a podcast that was, while it was never like massive numbers or anything, it was very influential because the tournament scene was pretty tight, and so a lot of tournament organizers would watch that. And they created a points ladder, so there was reasons to go out. I mean, your fellow countrymen's got oldworldrankings.com, which is sweet, but also gives sort of an idea of like, here's how many people are playing, here's who they are, right? And so all of this infrastructure, even things like Best Coast pairings, which is what Old World Builder pulls a lot for, Old World Rankings pulls a lot from, was created to run the LVO. So all of this infrastructure comes from basically two tournament organizers in the United States and lots of other people sort of also excited about 40K following them. But the ITC had an FAQ that took the harder edges off of 7th edition 40K and sort of made it a little bit more broadly appealing when you're playing it at trying to win tier of playing, right? Sort of like in Old World, we never really got there, but Rule of 3 would be that kind of a concept, which is we want to just take away some of the things that are just kind of, one might say, offensive to some people in the Warhammer community, or something that might keep them at home. They tried to be more sort of singles player centric. Meanwhile, there were a bunch of other competing sort of community philosophies, one of them being the ETC, the European Team Championship. And they would have had a much more, I would say, by the book approach. They would patch it as far as they had to patch it to be able to play the game, but it attempted to be more rules as written. And there were many other large influential regional tournaments that would have their own FAQ packs. And so it went. But there's a sort of cultural divide over, do you play it as close as possible to the books with the fewest amount of changes as you can, which resulted in a pretty intense, crazy game. But if you were at that tippy top elite tier, still had a lot of nuance, had a lot of crunch, was very interesting. It was on a knife's edge. It was very satisfying to somebody who was, sort of your elite or elitist level player, didn't care if the army looked right, didn't care if the vibes were good, because the game to them was very satisfying. And also, after all, it's what they intended, if the designer had any intent at all, beside being able to go home for dinner at some point, So, these were the two philosophies. So I take a lot of inspiration, personally, from the ITC philosophy, which really was, what can we do to get people to play this game of Warhammer, which is sort of a bag of broken bones that we love. It's a beautiful mess, and we think this is awesome, and we want more people to come. How do we make that tent bigger? How do we motivate people to come out? So that's always a guiding philosophy for me. And Renegades, 15, 20 minutes later, Renegades is looking out and saying, of the potential user base of this game, you have old players. We know that from our survey. I know that that's about 75% of the engaged player base used to play, and 25% of it is just new players, never played fantasy before, which to me is a big number. impressively big number. And so both of those groups are probably influenced by a game that included those 7 other factions, either Total War, most likely. Just about everyone played Total War, by the way. Any old world player, there's like an 80% chance. Yeah, there's like an 80% chance you played Total War. But both groups, whether or not you had one in your shelf or loved them from from Total War, probably are like, what the hell? Like, this is one of my favorite factions. So if you're trying to grow a community or build a community based off of that, and those people are excited and get their armies on the table, and then they're like, okay, PDF page number 1, and they're like, what is this? That's gonna be a feel bad, and it's gonna be exclusionary, and it's not a big tent. It's immediately about half as big, I think, as what could potentially be there from the beginning, right? So that to me is why Renegades is super important. It's because like playing those armies as written, perhaps as intended, is kind of miserable. And so the point of Renegades is to make that less miserable. And it just sucks so bad that, like, you know, you come back from an apocalypse only to be Thanos snapped. It's not the greatest, right? So yeah.
Do you still think, I know that since the start you and Rob have thought that legacy factions or renegade factions are going to come back to the old world. Do you still think that is the case? I know it's still, 18 months into the game, but from an outsider, not an outsider, from someone who's come into Old World as my first edition, it seems to me from the outside of watching AOS and Old World, it looks like Skaven is a very key part of AOS, and it looks definitely...
For 2 more years?
For 2 more years, yeah. Do you think it's still very much open for these to come back? Because as you said, and as I agree with, Vampire Counts, Lizardmen, Scaven, for a company that's obsessed with IP, they're probably the most unique factions I can think of in Warhammer, and stood out, were a big part of our experience 2 decades ago playing this game. And for them to not be in it, it does still feel like it's missing something, the old world. And the Renegade pack goes a long way. I've bought a Skaven army.
Wow. No pressure.
It
but
was
it's true,
a little
though.
hedge. I still think they're going to come back.
Yes.
Whether it's in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever. I would like to have a Skaven army ready to play. But the rules that are in the Renegade pack make them playable, so it's worth having anyway. But you still believe that they'll all come back?
So we don't actually know the future, but I do know the past really well. And so, like, the past of Games Workshop is, believe it or not, because it doesn't feel this way sometimes, they do a lot of fan service. All right, so they may not seem customer focused. Sometimes they feel I like to joke that they're almost customer agnostic. They're not. They don't necessarily believe that there are customers for them out there, and they're waiting for proof. And every now and then they get proof, and they do respond to demands. That's another big motivator of the Renegade pack, is that if you don't let these armies leave the game, which is kind of the intention of making them, manufacturing their obsolescence. You gave them rules, so you can't say, "Oh, you made us stop using these." No, we gave you rules, bud. They're right there, with a bowl of slop with flies buzzing around it. But I think if the community says, no, this, if you want to sell us this game, we want these guys. And yeah, that sounds like a little, like a tantrumish thing to say, but I will also point out we pay for this shit. This is a product they offer, and so if they're not offering the product in a way that is satisfying to its customer base, I think it's important that because we're not going to not buy the old world, we should at least buy it in a grumpy, angrily way. so that it opens the door for them to provide the things that I think we like, because I do partially agree with this concept of, like, they should have the creative freedom to do what they want with the game, 100%. But like them not releasing the other 7 factions, if it does just come down to some weird internal corporate division over IP inside their company, which is what it appears to be, or a strategy to make sure that certain IPs are delineated and specific to different games or lines. For whatever reason it might be, it's not customer centric. It's not fan centric. It's corporate goal centric, and that in that direction it's never not necessarily a good thing for a company to make important decisions like that way. That all being said, do I think they're coming back? I find it super hard to believe that that they wouldn't, just because of how intrinsic they are. I can also see a world where they always were meant to come back, but like Old World worked better than they thought it was going to. I think that's quite obvious. I think they definitely undercooked the release in the sense of it was quite half baked, and they I don't think they expected the response they got. I think there was probably some debate about whether this was a worthy project, based on the investment in certainly the core rules writing, the investment in tooling and miniatures and models, all that stuff just strikes me as like, all right, if you want to do it, you can do it, but you're gonna have to, it's like, yeah, you can stay over at your friend's house tomorrow night, but you've got to mow the lawn, you've got to you've got to clean your room, you got to do all these dishes, and you owe me $100. Like, there's no way in hell you guys are actually gonna pull this off, but I'm gonna set those demands, and then lo and behold, all those things happen, right? So okay, fine. Now the grown-ups in the room kind of have to perk up and pay notice to that. And we've seen that actually in the financial report. We just did a show on this, where certainly from an IP perspective, it always should have been there because they've been licensing it since they blew it up on the tabletop, and before. But certainly from an IP perspective, they view the fantasy world as one of their core 4 sort of settings, right? And as it should be. And if they view it that intensely, then one might think, or that as one of the 4 legs of the table, if you will, or the 4 legs of the stool, then yeah, I think there's no reason why that wouldn't get fleshed out over time.
To pivot to, so then you talked about...
You've gone underwater to me for some reason.
Yeah. Ooh,
that's better.
Oh, there you are.
Must be my son's gaming setup. This was his best headset, but
right under the bus. You call this your best headset, boy?
I reckon he had the one behind his back, and he's like, "Sure, Dad, take this." When you talked about Renegades, so that, and you went through the history of sort of making the tent as big as possible, and I sort of feel like in real life, events are about that you want as many people to come and have as good time as possible. And because there are different expectations, you do have to have a set of basic behaviors that you want to inculcate. But at the same time, you're going to find like-minded people. You're going to find the lore guy, the hobby guy, and various shades of grey or colour, actually, within that. Do you think, so you've had a lot to do with Warhall. On this channel, we've been pretty big supporters. We don't play on Warhall, but we're big supporters of, well, isn't this the ideal place for some of the win at all costs, which I guess is a pejorative term, but bleeding edge tournament players who are trying to win on every game. That feels like the best place to play. And one of the big things that's sort of changed over the last sort of 10 years is that that's now very accessible to people. And I feel like there's a lot that the real world game can learn from Warhall as well. Are you still involved a lot with that? I know Espot 3 is sort of wrapping up or has wrapped up. I'm not sure.
I think we're coming up on we're in the final week for the regionals and the finals for the finals. So yes, it is coming to an end. It got a little torpedoed or a little thrown off by
bad timing.
Also good. I knew it was out there. I thought we would get a little further into the event before it dropped, just how the timing worked. But I didn't know that, so instead, basically, Squarebase, the Squarebase Online Tournament, affectionately known as the SBOT, is something I kicked off. I guess the first one was over a year ago now. And it's played online on Warhall, and it's available to people in our Patreon. But we kicked off the 3rd version of it, hotly anticipated, delayed it a long time to try and get missions lined up and all this stuff. And then 3 weeks in, maybe 2 weeks in, the game basically starts refreshed, right? So kudos to there are people who are like, nope, I'm going to hang in there and play. I will tell you this. If that shit happened to me and I was in the middle of an online tournament that takes 7 weeks, I would quit immediately. So the people who didn't, I'm very impressed by. And so thank you to all those folks. But anyway, that's the online tournament, and it was disrupted. Is it a great place for the win at all costs gamers? I gotta find a better I don't know, game centric people who are mechanically minded, folks who the number one thing they care about is the crunch, like the stuff like actually playing the game. I will take a brief moment to remind people that Warhammer is set up as a game between two people where one person wins and the other one loses. So the purpose of the game is to win. That is the fundamental foundational level, is that this is a heads up game where two guys are fighting, right? And yes, it has its cousins to historical games, which are very obviously scenario based, purposefully imbalanced because that's how the world works, all that kind of stuff. In this game, you are told to both have equal value armies, in theory, white versus black. I'm talking about chess, guys. Shit. You edit, right? So as I was saying there, essentially the reason I digressed in that whole thing about Warhammer as a competitive game is just that trying to set up this concept that it's okay to try to win Warhammer, first and foremost. And second of all, that Big Ten philosophy, I think you said that there's all kinds of different flavors of gamers, if you're into the lore, into the painting or whatever. In the 2-day event scene, people who show up to 2-day events, my belief is most of them, their number one thing is probably just playing the game, whether that's, at the absolute bleeding edge, top tier, trying to, use all the rules they possibly can have, or just showing up with the army they think is cool, whatever. Playing the game might be their number one motivation, but they are also incredible hobbyists. They read they read the books. They cried when the end times happened. They too bleed. So tournament gamers are just Warhammer hobbyists like anyone else. I think the only difference that sets them apart is, one, they're exceptionally social, so they're willing to go and play Warhammer with strangers, which is probably the biggest, most scariest thing for most people. Actually, it's not balloons or whatever. It's this is a very intense social situation.
Yeah.
The Warhall is, I think, as Hugo, the creator of Warhall, would say, it would be a placebo for that. It's the methadone of playing Warhammer. So it doesn't. I don't think it comes anywhere close to the experience of playing on the tabletop, because of how cool that is. The amount of work and effort and payoff you get getting armies on a table. There are better games, one of them being Total War, to play in a digital way. Where Warhol, I think, is great, is in the situation where maybe you don't have a lot of people local. Maybe also you're a parent, you're a new parent, and you only have a couple of hours at the end of the day, and you'd still like to learn the game. Or maybe you have an army idea that you don't want to drop $1,000 on, or 4,000 Australian dollars on.
Whoa.
We can get into currency and Cancer Shop on a separate episode. It's pretty wild to me. But anyway, it provides you a really great place to learn rules, see how things interact, try the game for a first time, all that kind of stuff. But you do lose a lot. The translation is not perfect, and I view it as a tool like an airbrush, or a laser pointer when you're trying to figure out if you got the right line of arc. It's a tool in the Warhammer bag, or a 3D printer. It's just another tool that you have to be able to engage with the game in a way that maybe is a bit easier for you, or opens up things that you couldn't have done otherwise. And I think a really important one. It does steal a bit of joy, though, because people can crush games out immediately, right? So when we see Cathay, and I think my co-host is, I think, a little bit, I think, rightfully saddened by the fact that Cathay If you're a brand new player, talking about that big tent and being like trying to grow community and stuff, Cathay should have been this massive onboarding moment, and probably was. But now, like, you can see, just I hate this image, but like the little kid who's excited to come play, and like everyone's like, you suck, like, and like like just because they happen to like pick up the cool new models, suddenly now they have all these pejoratives thrown at them. Oh, you're a power gamer, you're just stupid Cathay balloons, blah blah blah, and like that just completely sucks a lot of the awesome moment that Cathay should be, because I think stuff like Warhall and enthusiastic people and folks who can read saw the good stuff and have gone to there, and it's a little bit much, certainly, and that kind of ruins it. Part of that is something like Warhall. If it wasn't Warhall, it'd be TTS, Tabletop Simulator. And it creates its own meta that is not bound by, physical limitations of, do I have those models? So we find out the ending really before anyone's even opened a book. This goes back to the how fast the meta moves thing. And that is a bummer for a lot of people. And it's also not the whole story, right? Because how things actually physically work on a table is slightly different. There is some translation there that will change, but I think something like Warhall to me is conclusive in discovery. Like if you find something that works in Warhall, it's going to work in real life, and that can be a buzzkill, especially the speed that works.
Yeah.
And I think my co-host Rob would say, just go play, just go play. If you happen to encounter somebody who's running an army that's really really harsh, or very very good, odds are they play more than you, first and foremost. You may or may not have the tools to deal with it, but you probably, even if you did have the tools, would you have enough reps to be able to use them right anyway? Like that kind of a thing. Like just playing is, I think, the most important part. And you also wind up finding out that like losing ain't so bad and it's not so scary after all. So there you go.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the aesthetic of it as well, which is something a lot of people believe you lose at Warhall, which I would
100%,
agree.
yeah.
Like it doesn't look as beautiful as the game of Warhammer does on
Yeah.
a table, which is a big draw card for a lot of people. But the other thing that just recently in the local Sydney scene, there was a little division around sports, like how to behave at a table. There wasn't like abuse or stuff like that, but just kind of like social power plays to like not manipulating busted rules, but kind of steering less experienced people down this path to make mistakes. There was some
in 40K they called that angle shooting, where you would basically more than your opponent.
Yeah.
And you're basically sounding. You're trying to see what they know and what they don't know, and you can use that to get an advantage over your opponent. Whether that's by withholding information that you do know, or like you say, leading them down the line. It's a shitty way to behave.
I think you guys mentioned it. I was listening to one of your episodes maybe last week, and was it? Or was it Old World Fanatics? I listened to a lot. Someone was saying, what is the response for someone who is not of a hard competitive line, but even could be middle of the road, but comes up against this person who, has poor sportsmanship at the table? How should you respond? And like, there was like a few answers, and some of them were just disengage, which I find really difficult to do. Like when someone is trying to...
You do, Paddy. It's a family failing.
Yeah, it is. I bite. But if someone's trying to coerce me into something, it's hard for me to just let them kind of walk over me, even if they are better than the game at me, know the rules better than me. I expect when I come across someone like the opposite, I help them.
You help them. That's right. And by the way, you are not the exception. You are the rule. So I just want to first and foremost say that. So to answer your question, what do you do about it? I will, again, leaning on growing up, I mean, I started playing this when I was in my 30s. So, but like the experience of watching 40K become what it is, not just as like a cultural thing, but like more like as a tournament scene, which is just absolutely mind-blowingly huge for what it is. We've learned all of these lessons before, right? So like the number one thing that sucks in that scenario is that you don't know what you don't know. That's the purpose of it. It is if this was a form of fraud, that would be the social engineering fraud, where you just like call up you call up and pretend to be someone else, and you just charm the person into giving you personal information, right? Like that's that type of fraud. It is a really shitty kind of manipulation, right? And at a personal level, one thing I think is you still got to give the benefit of the doubt. So the thing about Warhammer at any level of play is this is a collaborative game. Okay, it simply does not work if one person is holding cards secretly, or is like trying to do gotchas, or hoping an opponent doesn't notice they're outside of an inch. That opponent might think that they're inside of an inch. You know what I mean? And so like if the game state is ever mismatched, if I think the game is this and you think the game is this, that's going to cause constant conflict. I think what was learned about playing Warhammer with strangers in 40K and probably other games as well is this concept of constantly agreeing on what the game state is. So as you're doing moves, or actually before you're doing moves, you're checking in. You're saying, I think this is this far. I think I can, based on these rules, do this. Do you agree? And it becomes this very like British-sounding conversation, essentially, where you're constantly agreeing on the game state before any dice are rolled, before something happens. It took a long time to get there in 40K. Before that, it would always be just do it and then have the argument, right? I was in, I was out, I wasn't out, I was in, whatever. Or I can do this because of this rule from the German FAQ that I've translated to English. You know, all this weird, crazy bullshit that has no place in anything. And what really killed that was people, the meta, getting good. So what that is genuinely what killed that. What killed that was the guy who was pulling one over on their opponent by knowing more, that like their competitive edge was just knowing more than their opponent. Not about how to play the game, but just mechanically, and also was confident enough to just push. So I called them strong personalities, a euphemism for asshole or bully. They could bully their way to the top of events routinely. They became extinct, I want to say, 2018, 2019. Okay, wow. And not like full, like that style became so much harder because your opponent would be like, hold on, you can't do that. Or, and like the caliber of opponent just got to the point where they may have been able, I'm so sorry, they may have been able to use that bullshit to get to, 3-0, or, even 4-0 top table, at a smaller event. But the person who they finally get, eventually there was this glass ceiling, and they just eventually wandered off, because they couldn't bully their way to the top anymore, or they adjusted and they started playing collaboratively and had to raise their game and get better. But that to me is a toxic individual, and I'd say the best defense against it is, one, if you do meet someone who is pushing like that, who is always remembering rules in their favor. Because I will also say this, I do that a lot. I think it's a common impulse to be like, oh wait, I got this rule, and then your opponent's like, no, you don't, and they're like, fuck, you're right, I'm grasping at straws. It is I think a normal impulse to try and like think of things that you can do. But if you have an opponent that's like, oh, you have that rule, okay, fine, go, and you're wrong, like suddenly you're either a cheater, an asshole, or whatever, right? So but I do think like the greatest inoculation to it is the community getting better. But what needs to happen is, one, TOs need to be aware of this if they hear about that kind of behavior. They have to be willing to be the grown-up in the room and have a conversation with that player, the one who was the bully or perhaps was pushing things too far or making people feel unwelcome by being a jerk at the table. Because they are, if they play 5 players in an event, and 3 of them were just there to try and have a good time, and they feel like they were like abused, and like that's the only game they think about when they go home, or God forbid they play 2 people like that, which I've played 2 people like that maybe like a year, like, if I was in the days where I was going to like multiple events, right? Like it wasn't a thing I thought was particularly common. But like, it's important that the TO is on top of that. And if someone needs to understand or take a timeout, that's important. But I also genuinely believe that it's the actual scene maturing, getting too good to have that shit pulled on them, is really what gets rid of that type of player, or helps to get rid of them, because they just can't. If their goal is to win, if they are truly win at all costs, and they are trying to bully their way to the top, and they're doing that in a way that they know this is the way that can work, and it stops working, well, it stops being interesting, because and also you become a pariah. It's no fun being that guy eventually. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question. I just think, groups of Warhammer players are groups of people, guys. Like, dear internet, it's a group of people. In a group of people, you're going to have the vast majority be just normal, nice enough folks. You're going to have a few gems in there who are just awesome, and you can't wait to see them every time you're at an event. And then there's going to be some folks that nobody likes because they're assholes. This is a group of people. This is not unique to Warhammer players. It is a group of people, and the larger your group of people, the gross amount of gross people will be there just by virtue of it being a group of people. So don't be shocked, and also give benefit of the doubt. You're going to run into those folks. Just going to have to like hang in there, get through the matchup. If you don't like it, it's a life-affirming event, folks. Sometimes you run into people you don't like, and you got to get through that. It's only 3 hours. The next game will probably be someone you do like. And don't throw the baby out with the bathwater if you have a bad experience, and make sure you communicate your bad experience with the responsible adult on the scene, usually the TO. You don't have to put people on blast. This is another thing that always started happening, is like, after the event, you go online and you share the feedback. Don't do that. During the moment, if you are hip enough to be like, I think I'm getting screwed over here, get the TO then, in the game. That is important, because most people don't do that. It's like during lunch, and they're like eating their cereal for some reason. They're like, I got screwed over. And then, like that's too late. If for like the game purposes, it's too late. So in the moment's the best. A lot of time we don't realize it. We're a boiling frog thing going on. But as soon as you do think something not cool happened, you got to talk to the TO, because then the TO at least has an opportunity to do something. If you're a TO, you got to at least have a conversation if you're getting bad feedback about a player, both with the person telling you about it, and then ideally hearing the other side and talking to their opponents and seeing if it's a common thing. And then from there, trying to treat them like the person, because you got to give them the benefit of the doubt too. There's also this other thing that will happen, which is witch hunts, which also drives me nuts, because Warhammer players often confuse what in sports would be a penalty with cheating. Like there's breaking a rule, which usually in sports would be a penalty, and then there's giving yourself an unfair advantage through some foreign thing, which is cheating. So like there is just fucking up and bullying someone over a rule you're 100% sure about, and just being wrong and an asshole. And then there is knowing that you're wrong and cheating, right? Those are 2 different things. So like, this is a very complicated, I hope actually ultimately simple thing, which is, again, Warhammer events have people in them. Some of them are assholes. Most of them are awesome. Some of them are really awesome. If you run into someone you consider to be maybe an asshole in the moment, you're going to want to call for a TO. And then after the game, you're going to want to talk to a TO if that's when it comes. And then that TO needs to be that community node, that person who can pull the parties aside and find out what happened and talk it through.
I think it's good at that if like one side of tournaments, but something I wanted to get your take on. It sort of occurred to me when I started playing again, because for me, I think it took a little bit of convincing to get back into the game, but then I found like I had a stressful job at the time, and I was just start painting these miniatures. So it's the adult version of coloring in. And we didn't really have any intention of going back to events. Like I'd had that history with events. I'd
Yeah, I
played
could be a
that.
convention guy.
Who knew?
Nah, I just want to paint some minis.
That's right.
I'm not gonna
say
start a
what
podcast.
I won't say what my wife said to me the other day. It got me. Yeah, she took it back, but I don't want to record it for posterity. But
Okay.
it was something about Warhammer. And
My wife, apropos of nothing, I know you're getting to the point. Apropos of nothing, we were walking down the street. She turned to me and said, "I would rather die than play Warhammer." To which I replied, "Like not live anymore." But that
it was in the
years ago.
ballpark. It was in the bandwidth of that comment.
So she has since realized the good effects of it. But yes, anyway, sorry, I completely derailed you. Go ahead.
That was pretty much the topic. Was that there was that it was just paint some miniatures. It built up. I was desperate to play because we were even though we still got to play a bit, we weren't playing often, and I could probably play once a week.
Yeah.
And get away with it, which is a lot more than a lot of people who are online and invest in Warhammer that I'm aware of. But when I went to tournaments, and because I work in schools, this is an issue that I think is popping up. But I've been surprised at the outlet for sort of male friendship that this is. And, there's not just men who play Warhammer. In fact, there's sort of an increasing group of neurodivergent or different sorts of people anyway, just in gaming. But I think it's a funny thing that I've sort of come around in argument to my wife that this is a really healthy way to express my masculinity. I get to kill things on the tabletop. I come home happy. I paint for an hour and a half after work.
Creative outlet.
Some nights.
Yep.
And, apart from the bank balance side of it, it is very much something that I think, we're talking now about this crisis where boys and men don't sort of have a lot of friends sometimes in their life. But I feel like, well, why don't you come play Warhammer? You get to shoot the shit. So is that something you've noticed at all? Because I feel like it's a very modern issue. When I was back selling games a long time ago, it was less of a problem. But there is a lot more isolation in communities. Tournaments are getting bigger. I'm finding them very, very positive, especially where we live. Patty and I have made friends from it. But at the same time, it just feels like it's a really big deal for some people to get out and play Warhammer socially.
Yeah. Here. I think if you want to talk about the biggest thing that I think Warhall robs of it is the fact that you're not across the table from somebody. You still have that there's a disassociative effect being online. Even a Zoom call or a video podcast, right? We're not physically present with one another. So like my story is I was a bit embarrassed. I guess I'm still like, I'm an elder millennial. So like, I still feel like I felt deep shame about like going back to play with my toys when I got back into it. It was a secret. My name online is VAL HEFFELFINGER. A lot of that was so that I had like a delineation between myself and for Google purposes and career, but like also it allowed me to like not on my like normal social media have people like what's this Warhammer stuff I keep seeing you like liking and like interacting with, because I didn't want to explain myself. Like I was quite a bit sheepish, and over time, and I would do things like what Games Workshop often does, which is diminish it by, I would call it, it's just minis or it's toy soldiers or whatever. And then as time continued, I met through travel and through attending events and through actually a lot of podcasting and talking to people. I just developed this like literally global network of genuine friends. And people who are like essential in my life and in my social fabric, who have met my family and like visited and like stayed at my house or even local in my city and are just really close friends now. I've attended weddings, all of this, like they have become my social group, and the thing that unites us is Warhammer. And so like, eventually I had to say to myself, can I really diminish and say that this is a silly use of my time when like I am getting all of this like meaningful, like real, like meaningful interaction and friendship and just like quality time out of it? Can I really talk shit about it all the time? Like if like in an honest way, and I decided, no, I can't. Like I have to like realize that there is beyond the whatever weird shit in my brain makes me love little guys fighting in my imagination on a tabletop. I don't know why that's my thing. I can't kink shame myself anymore over that. It just is. I love the minis. But the fact that I like that and other folks like that, and they tend to be a lot like me, that provides just such a great way of meeting people. And yeah, I don't feel socially isolated. Maybe I would. Like my close friends that I went to university and went all that kind of stuff. They're all over the place now. They're in different countries. They're in different parts of Canada. Australia's like this too. It's gigantic. Like, like it's like this kind of a relationship is as good as I got for a lot of my university and high school friends. They're just not around. And the local community that I have, I'm sure there are like community nodes and things, but they're not necessarily obvious. Whereas once there were more like really community centric things, you might say church, various rec leagues and things, like other ways to socialize, but they're not necessarily obvious or things that I'm particularly plugged in or engaged with. Warhammer just is for me. And yes, I wholeheartedly agree. It is just a great way to meet people. And another reason why I am such a proponent of not being exclusionary, being welcoming to all types, because it's not just about men. There's no reason why all genders and people who identify however they do can't enjoy the game and get what I get out of it if they happen to like minis and really complicated games. There's no reason why I don't have a lot in common with you if those are the things that appeal to you, right? So like anytime I see sort of the gatekeeping exclusive type talk, and like a lot of times, you'll see like Warhammer will occasionally get mixed up in culture war. First it breaks my heart, and then it makes me very pissed off because again, if you happen to like the things that for whatever reason hook you into Warhammer, you have so much in common with that person, and you will likely get along with them on some level. So yeah, it is a brilliant thing, and that's why I like to encourage it, especially events and getting out and being social. Yeah. Oh, we lost you
Can't
again.
hear you again, Alex. There you are.
It feels like when
Your-
I get going,
Your
then I just kinda
Timu
fire
headset
up.
that your son gave you is failing.
We also had this concept when we started playing, and some of the people that we felt that we made connections with early on, we called the new dads. And it was sort of this strange, and you might want to buy in, Val, on this because I'm more of an old dad, but I'm still someone who I was a gaming addict as a kid. I used to play Monopoly by myself on the top bunk, Paddy, before you were born.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
Some
Warhammer in the
tough
90s.
negotiations
there weren't
on rent on that one.
many. It was, yeah. But then into the 2000s, worked in a game store, played Magic, all those things very competitively, and then had a child, and that was it. Like I sort of would play some video games, child on my shoulder, had twins 2 years later,
Oh
had to
wow.
get real job, etc. And so then came back, and now, fortunately, I've got enough money. My kids are now a bit older, and other people here that have children who aren't yet. But it is an interesting dynamic. So you've got that one side where the social event, but I feel like the expectations also are starting to change a bit as people, as you say, elder millennial. Gaming has been normalized a lot for us over the time. Like, we played consoles and things like that, and then it's now not a crime to spend your leisure time playing a game
Sure.
instead of
It never
rec league.
was. There was just always more acceptable versions of games, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
yeah.
right. That's right. So do you think that is something too that you see a bit more? Because we're seeing sort of, it's not a divide, it's just a different set of expectations, and you might want a more comfortable chair at the event instead of
I see.
in Australia, 50 degrees in a tin shed where they would run some of the biggest events in the country. But do
Yeah.
you see some more people coming to events who are, have families, I suppose, or have other commitments, and they're trying to wedge in Warhammer amongst that?
So for one reason that I gravitated to events was, believe it or not, like for me, like if I could plan a day at like a 3-day event, or eventually, hey, you know, what do you mind if I just like take off for a weekend? This is even before kids. It still felt like a lot to like just peace out for 2 days to play Warhammer, because also the event wasn't necessarily in Toronto. I had to go somewhere, right? But I did find that for me, for whatever reason, in my personal life, it was easier for me to say a month or 2 months from now, I'm gonna play Warhammer, and I'm gonna drink deeply from the cup. You know, like I'm gonna get my 3 games in, or my 5 games in, or whatever, at that tournament. It was easier than like for me than having like a regular games night, right? Because like life was just is and just continues to be very busy. I could plan for the disruption if it was far enough out. So that's one of the big reasons why I think events were good for me. And it didn't feel like Warhammer was constantly inserting itself into things. Now with kids, post bedtime, I sometimes will like that weeknight game is actually probably a lot, like that's where I get a lot of my games in now. And like, you know, after bedtime or whatever, I can sometimes be coherent enough to be able to play, and like that has become more of a thing. But in either event, it was, again, I was very careful not to, like, it felt like I didn't want to take away from, you know, my relationship and other relationships to go do this thing, because it also is exclusionary to the non-Warhammer people in your life. You know, like you are saying, I'd rather go do this, right? And so I really did focus a lot on balancing, and that's why events worked well for me. The chair thing, I will say, fantasy is a sitting man's game. Okay, that's one of the.
Are you a sitter? Do you sit while you play?
If you're not sitting while you play Old World, like, you're missing one of the key benefits of Old World, which is basically not having to stand. You can just reach and push. You can survey. You need like 10 dice, so you don't even have to, like, you don't even really need to, like, if you're 6 foot, that's all you need. Like, you got the game covered. There's someone on the other side of the table. They can figure shit out on the other side. Yeah, I used to always love like the old heads at 40K events, because they would just be crumpled, you know, like on like, because, you know, like, I don't think it's necessary. Like, you know, again, Warhammer is played by people, and people come in all different shapes of sizes and physical ability and personal neglect. Or not. And so, you know, sometimes those guys would just be crushed by gravity and, you know, sitting and a lot of gesturing going on at those tables. But yeah, I think, yes, you should have chairs. I do like to take advantage of the chair. If a game is intense, you're usually on your feet. Yeah, if you're at a 5-game event, remember, you can take a sit. You can have a little sit down too, guys. That is an important thing to avail yourself of. Also, if chairs are an innovation for Australian gaming events, do I have things to tell you guys about?
I can't wait.
We got stuff. There's these things called gaming mats now. Like, so you don't have to just have glued sand to the table that skins your knuckles. You have like a really nice neoprene surface. It's amazing. Like, there are all sorts of innovations.
Not in my game. That's fine.
Only bloody knuckles.
It's not bloody knuckles. It's not. How many games are you getting? Just quickly, because I think we'll wrap it up pretty soon. But how many games do you get a week, a month? What's your average? Like, how frequently can you find a game?
I'm lucky enough to be in sort of a big city. I could play basically whenever I want. A benefit of having Australian friends is there's always someone around, right? So like Warhall means I can play whenever I want. I don't tend to, though. I would say during the summer here, like if I'm lucky, every couple of weeks has probably worked out to how it is. Yeah. And then usually, again, like I've booked a mandate, and like I have a table set up, so someone comes over, and we might get a game or two in. Recently, I've gotten sort of a game. I think I'm up to around 4 or 5 games of 1.5 at this point.
Yeah, nice.
So yeah. So that's probably like a game a week recently, but I haven't been to an event in a little while. I was really like in the spring, I was really lucky just the way things worked out. I was able to get to, I think, 3 2-dayers in probably 3 months, which was unusual. Wow. Usually like like if I get to 3 or 4 events in a year, like that feels pretty luxurious to me. And I'm really grateful if I can get that many. But yeah, just worked out that I was able to get to a bunch then. So yeah, man, I play more than your average bear, not nearly as much as like your most one might call it degenerate Warhammer player who likes just constantly getting games in whatever format they can.
We've lost you again, Alex. Sit closer. I think you got to sit up.
Dad,
There's
can you hear me
probably a
now?
loose connection.
There you go.
It
Yeah,
is
there you
Tim.
go.
I'm gonna get him. He's it's
Only
probably
Alibaba. I've told you 1,000 times.
could be burnt out from Rocket League.
Yeah.
But you said something recently on a recent pod with you and Rob about enthusiasm, and this was a huge thing for us. Like in the background, as you said, there's a lot of work that goes into these things. Paddy and I are always talking about what we want to do next on the channel. And the one thing, and this has been Paddy more than me, because I can veer into the critical, that you just got to keep it positive, don't you? Like, what is there to be negative about? And is anyone playing too much Warhammer? Is probably the way I would say anyway. But it's a leisure activity. Is there anything like final words you could say to your Australian fans and the worldwide about just what is there to be negative about? We see the replies in the chats, the forums, and what's the point, guys? You're playing a game for 3 hours with painted miniatures, as you've spent a lot of money on. How would you sell that like again to people? Because I just think it's been the most valuable take on Warhammer over the last 15 months or so. That the game's back, it didn't exist, people want to play it. I think the enthusiasm's at an all-time high. How would you say to someone who's just like, oh, but sky balloons, or as you said before, is it just you've just got to play and enjoy it?
So one, I think is to validate those emotions because they're not wrong. Like there's no reason why that the game should be released in the states that it often is released. And so for me, I've often called like being a big passionate fan of Games Workshop experiences is sort of an exercise in unrequited love that is not returned. So like you have this incredible amount of investment and passion about something. You can see how like straightforward a fix would be, or like how things should work in your head. We all do this, and then the thing comes out and it does not meet those expectations for whatever reason, and that dissonance is causes emotions, right? Big feels. Where the parents understand this. Human beings should understand this too, right? Like, it just causes big feels. If it's like, why? Like the legacy factions, why? Like it's absurd. But legacy factions might be an example of there's shit you can do, right? Like, and so one thing is if you're if you're just really pissed off about how this meta looks like it's going to shape up if it's left untouched. Then you're like, I think then what needs to happen is a constructive conversation about, okay, what can we do in the interim? Because what really what makes me a bit worried and b a bit sad is that really we have a better game fundamentally than we did before. But what's really weird is we might get a worse meta, or at least a more boring meta from like a playing in events scenario. So if that is a trajectory that's possible as like a community leader and as community leaders out there, if anyone's listening, if you run events or whatever, you might think to yourself, okay, well, what are the things that are causing this emotional reaction, right? Like what are the things that are making people disappointed? Because it should be everyone's so jacked. Like that's where we should be. We should be like, holy shit, there's a new army for the first time in 23 years. Holy shit, they just rewrote a good chunk of this game and tried their best, although came up short in a number of important ways, to like make it closer to the way we imagined it. So like that dissonance from the beginning of like, this is just dragons and like units of 5 guys running around. Like what? That's not Warhammer. They're trying to pull it back to where it's supposed to be, but they still haven't quite nailed it. What can we do, right? And as someone who's got like an event, the Square Based Open Toronto, if you happen to be in my neck of the woods, please do come on out October 18th and 19th ish, the weekend that's something like that. um, like come on out to that. I'm looking at that. So what can we do with format? What can we do with missions? A lot of people are putting a lot of value on the match play guide in being able to change how the game is played, maybe make it less focused on killing everything. But I think when you get your teeth into the match play guide, you'll find that there's just not enough secondary points to make up for someone who's really good at killing stuff. Right? So how do we amend that as TOs to get the meta that is there? Like, and I don't think it's that far. And I'm personally playing with maybe a few comp restrictions and a scoring change to try and at least allay those concerns, because I don't think they're crazy. First of all, I don't think it's crazy to think that like 3 character balloons that have a ward save and a very good armor save ignore all the rules of the game and can scout, can like just do like, it is a kind of unfun play experience. I don't think that they're crazy to think that like if they face that in a game that it's going to probably not go well for them if they're not particularly tooled to deal with that exact thing, right? And so like we caught some strays because out of the gates when Old World dropped, like when we were looking at how army composition worked, immediately I thought to myself, shit, like this really sets up well to have very spammy lists, which may or may not matter competitively, right? Like it may or may not wind up that a spammy list actually is the best list, like all gyrocopters or all razor gores or whatever the like very big. There's basically Linehammer and like gyro spam or the 2 like boogeyman out of the gates, right? And so Linehammer, I felt, Rob and I both felt that like Linehammer probably would be situational and wasn't going to be like defining. There were other bigger issues around, or like that would probably be more definitive. But I did feel that if like all you need is a couple of memes of an army list that is again offensive, it's weird because we're really emotionally invested in Warhammer because you spend hours building these toys, and these armies are not just pieces on a chess table. They all have a friggin' backstory to them. Some of them have names, like these are very important things to us. So like you get really invested in them being too good or too bad. But so rule of 3 represented an attempt to just make armies look right. Because fundamentally, if you like Warhammer, you're probably as much into it for aesthetic reasons, how it looks, how it feels, as you are for gaming reasons. There are probably people who really love the gaming because it is a lot of fun as a game. Mechanically, it's super fun to get like really into the nitty gritty of it and try as hard as you can at it. Super great. But ultimately, you could play this with cardboard cutouts. You could play this on Warhall. You could play a better game mechanically that probably scratches those itch, but you don't want to because you like Warhammer. So there's an aesthetic purpose to Warhammer that is a requirement of it. And there are conventions in Warhammer, like social conventions of Warhammer that are part of its appeal. How hard it is to do is part of its appeal, oddly enough. So that is all to say that, like, I think a lot of people get obsessed, especially the gamer-centric folks. You might say the very elite crowd, the ones who might play on a national 8-person team, the ones who might go to a Masters. They don't want you to mess with the crunch. They don't want you to take that challenge away because we got to figure this out. It's a puzzle. That's what they're there for. But if you're running single events and if you're building community, then you need to not always coddle. Like, it's not about coddling or like making it like we only run core models in this group, but you do have to at least give some, I think, space for the people who are like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to like go play those armies. And potentially, maybe you do need to modify your tournament pack to take the hard edges off, potentially. Or, like, if you're the individual, realize that, like, at most events, everyone's not going to be running it undead. Everyone's not going to have Cathay. Odds are you might face them in turn 1, but, like, unless you go on a heater, you may not even see them. They might be existing on a different plane than you, especially if you're a new player and you're just trying some stuff. You may not even see these like bogeyman army because they're kicking ass way up at the top of the event, right? You're probably just playing folks like you, most of the time, and you might get one game against some real fire stuff. But for the most of the time, you're probably just playing at people at a similar level. That's how Swiss pairings work. So that is all to say that yes, it sucks that we have shitty things in the like I would say skewing power levels in the meta right now. It sucks that Games Workshop hasn't addressed them, and they should. It sucks that Games Workshop released them. I think there's this big we were talking about like sort of that rules update cycle and stuff at the beginning, and people get mad about the pace of change and all that kind of stuff. Well, people should get mad that these things get released like this in the first place, right? But the problem is that we're not gonna buy it. The same issue that it's the same issue that the video games have, is that there's a perverse incentive for them to just keep doing the same bullshit. So like I think we need to stop focusing on like, because we have to beg and plead and make noise for them to fix a bullshit thing rather than stop releasing bullshit things. A really interesting analog to this is Total War, because Total War kind of maybe learned a little bit too much from Games Workshop. That culture exchange maybe shifted a little bit too much Games Workshop's way, in the sense that they started releasing lots of DLC that the value proposition of decreased greater and greater amounts every time, and they also were not releasing it in a way that wasn't fundamentally broken from the first day. I personally know, from going back a long time ago, like Creative Assembly games, just don't bother playing. I just never bother playing it for a year after it comes out, because I know that it's going to be like tantalizingly close to awesome until it's patched, and then it's awesome. Either by the community, for the record, Total War is either patched by the community, tremendous amount of community built mods that make the game more deep and enjoying and fix a lot of quality of life issues, or fixed by the company itself. But both options are there, and that's a friggin' video game, right? Like, that is something that someone has to code. Like, if we want to fix a tournament meta and balance issues, we have to use a word processor, right? Like, it's just not like people talk about this stuff like you're building a spaceship, or like, like solving AI stuff. It's not that crazy, guys. And also, if we can have open conversations about what are the real pain points, which I hope to be able to start having, we can reasonably negotiate, I think, a settlement that makes everyone quite happy. And the players of the strong factions also need to realize that, if it, a lot of times it feels like you're being ostracized because you're playing a good army, and that's bullshit. Warhammer is like the only game in the world where it's like your fault if I lose. Right? That's fucked up. So
that
like,
should be the title for the chat, though. It's your fault that I lose.
It's your fault if I lose is messed up. So like, some of this is also like, pull up your pants, guys. Like we're like, like if you really are upset about getting stomped by something, if that really does upset you, yeah, you can take your ball and go home. Or you can just lose that game and move on with your life, right? And like, have fun with the person across the table. I got a guy named Shane Oss in our Discord. He's a local here. He's a brilliant guy when it comes to rules and mechanics in the game. Super into all of it, right? Like, he overwhelms me sometimes with his takes. But one time he said to me, yeah, this is one of his ideas, is like, sometimes. Like, did you have wrestling in Australia? I'm not a big wrestling guy, but
yeah.
He said there's this concept in wrestling, like, where someone is a jobber. Like, you got a job in the match, and your job is to lose, right? And so your duty as the jobber is to make the act of losing engaging and awesome for the audience. And in this case, the audience might just be you or your opponent, but sometimes you're going to hit a matchup that just sucks for you, right? And you got to find a way that you can either be miserable, or you can do your best to give a game and have a laugh. And like, that is, like, that also life-affirming moment. Sometimes you show up to a situation and you can't win, right? What do? You can quit, give up, say fuck it, complain about it on the internet, or you can figure out something else in that moment, right? And that's another thing about Warhammer. And yeah, sometimes it sucks to get knocked off the table, but again, maybe you have something else you can talk about with your opponent, and you're probably not going to face that same army again the next time. So there you go.
Well, this has been a life-affirming moment for me, Val. I'm very grateful for you coming on. It's been great to get your
Well,
take on some of these things. I think the game is taking off again, and we've been lucky. I mean, I know you're on the crest of the wave, but yeah, Patty, do you have anything else for
No,
Val? I
you
feel,
should.
yeah, it's been great.
If you're planning a tournament and thinking about your pack, then the tournament
mhm.
we go to every couple of months, the Western Sydney Wargamers run the Old Hammer tournament that Alex was talking about. We're going to probably be talking about their pack probably in the
Great.
next week, which they've just released, which is a take on 1.5. They've definitely introduced things on scoring and how it works. Some things we agree with, some things we don't, but we're in that age of discovery, as I like to call it, with 1.5, where we need to figure it out again. And they've always been pretty good, to be honest. This is their sixth tournament, and their tournaments have been not too outlandish, but they try new stuff. So
Good.
check it out.
And like honestly, we're at the starting line, right? So like a lot of people are worried about like the fracturing thing. We can all get on the same page when there's a song worth singing. You know, like when it matches everyone's expectations broadly enough, everyone does just play the same thing. The issue is right now the game does not necessarily do that for everybody, and so like locally you kind of have to negotiate that. However you may, and it might be by following a pack like that you see that you like from someone else. And there's lots of examples is what Squarebase does. There's the WTC. There's two of them, which is really funny. But the German one has a comp pack, which is I think really well constructed. Looks quite good, and that is the most tippy top competitive tier. And they do have limitations in it that are quite restrictive. They do change how certain missions work, all that stuff, right? So people are trying to adapt, and I think as players we need to realize like again, if the effort is to take the hardest edges and make it a bit more accessible, that just means that like in the future you might have an extra opponent or two. Whereas if you are the stick in the mud, let the meta play out. I want the craziest stuff. I do want to either play with or like figure out how to beat 7 balloons. Just realize like that kind of stuff is just, it's not for everyone. And again, not to say that it's not that like not to diminish what you really enjoy as a person, but like if we want to build this up to have more people that we can play games and be friends with, then we want to try and maybe soften it a little bit, and still again retain all the things that we like about it. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Well, Val, echoing Alex's sentiments, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolute pleasure.
Congratulations on the Renegade pack, everything you've done with Rob. It's been awesome and great momentum
Thank you.
driver for the entire community. So thank you so much. Alex, thanks.
Thank you guys. Thanks for your content as well. I will be looking forward to some further breakdowns. I think you guys had a Legacy or Renegade chat, which is one that caught my eye, and I've watched other episodes in the past too. So thanks for anyone out there who's out there running events, doing shows, playing games with friends. Just have fun. Like again, I think there's value in it, and thanks to everyone out there who's also a supporter or just a viewer of Squarebase. It's crazy. Just crazy that the amount of folks that will engage with us and talk to us about this. So that's really awesome, and I don't know, I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Val. Thanks again for your time. We'll see everyone for the next 2+ chat, probably in a couple of days' time. Stay safe. See ya.